There's absolute carnage in the world of Magic the Gathering today, as Wizards of the Coast has made a surprise ban and restricted announcement that essentially drops the hammer on a whole bunch of different cards and affects multiple formats. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. I come to you today with good or bad news, depending on your perspective, on how you feel about the cards that are getting banned here. Now, this ban announcement is different for a number of reasons. One, first of all, they didn't do an announcement a week in advance of this announcement, and in all honesty, they hit so many targets that they should have hit with this ban announcement that when I saw the picture originally of this being shared around without having seen the article, my initial thought, no word of a lie, was, no way, this can't be real. Like, I genuinely thought it wasn't real because, I mean, first of all, there's the absence of the pre-announcement, but more importantly, it just hit too many cards that actually feel like they need to get got. You know what I mean? So let's dive in and talk about all the different cards that are getting the ban hammer and what's going on behind it, all right? So we're starting out with Standard. Now in Standard, we have 4 different cards that are getting the ban hammer. The first is Wilderness Reclamation, and this card is incredibly powerful, let's be real. You know what I mean? It untaps all of your lands at the end of your turn. If you have multiple copies of it out, they all stack, so you can untap and get insane amount of mana, either for like obviously big instants, or you can even just use it in the regard of putting it out, untapping all the lands at the end of your turn and being ready to do things on your opponent's turn. But really, it just allowed for really explosive, insane setups. So Wilderness Reclamation is something people have been clamoring. Actually, you know what? Most of the stuff on this list is stuff people have been clamoring for bans for. So I guess I don't even really need to say that. This list is going to make a lot of people happy. Seeing Wilderness Reclamation getting the boot. Now, there are going to be some Simic and Azorius players who are unhappy, but at the end of the day, oh, boo-hoo, they took away this busted nonsense that they shouldn't have made in the first place. You know, Wilderness Reclamation should never have made it out the door. A lot of the stuff we're going to talk about is actually all stuff that was created under Wizards, like concepts of let's just push the power level of everything and just be disruptive to as many formats as possible. They don't call it attempting to disrupt as many formats as possible. They say they're trying to make cards that can reach into other formats, but there is literally no difference between the two. When cards reach into other formats, that is disruptive. It upsets the natural order of that format. Is that necessarily a bad thing? No. In fact, it's a good thing to occasionally be adding things to older, more stable formats. But when that comes at the cost of affecting the main formats like Standard and making them unplayable because of the power level of cards, that's a genuine issue. So Wilderness Reclamation is too strong, right? There's no doubt about it. The next card on our list is interesting for a couple of different reasons, and that's Growth Spiral. Growth Spiral is interesting, I mean, one, just because, first of all, it has absolutely gorgeous artwork by Seb McKinnon, right? It's pretty sweet. Secondly, it's a common, and Wizards tends to design commons at such a low power level that they rarely ever need to be banned. And I sort of suspect that Growth Spiral is getting the ban in lieu of another card that really probably should be considered for banning, but they don't want to ban yet because it's a mythic. You know what I mean? Like, what I'm talking about is Uro, because Growth Spiral, Lord, I'm having a hard time today. Growth Spiral and Uro represent a very similar sort of like niche in terms of you can accelerate you get like card advantage off of this. Now, Uro is repeatable and also the most expensive mythic from Theros. So with nerfing Wilderness Reclamation, Growth Spiral, all these kind of cards, they're basically trying to knock green-blue down a peg, right? And we all know that blue is the problem child because you don't see a bunch of mono green cards getting banned most of the time. You got to tuck that blue in there for it to really be a problem. But Growth Spiral is crazy ramp. It's a super efficient card. You get your mana's worth. This is being removed in an attempt to slow things down overall. Now we'll get into the full-on reasoning given out by Wizards in a moment, but I just kind of want to talk about each card and share my thoughts first. Now the next card getting banned is probably my favorite, and that is Teferi Time Raveler. I'm really, really happy to see Teferi Time Raveler go. This card is so uninteractive to the point where, like, anybody who plays this and is complaining about it going away, it's like tiniest violin in the world for you, guy. Because legit, it's so uninteractive. You're literally like, I'm going to put this out. You get to only play at sorcery speed. Oh, and I can also speed all my spells up to full speed, bounce your stuff. Like, Teferi is an obnoxious and oppressive card that got to stay in standard for way too long. Wizards doesn't get much credit for banning these problem cards so close to rotation, where it's like, dude, you let Teferi be a problem for the majority of its time in standard. And when there's 1 month left, you come along and ban it. I'm glad to see it go, but it really speaks to Wizards realizing, wait a minute, a bunch of people aren't playing our games and aren't playing in the environments that we want because we've totally mismanaged them. Their philosophy seems to be try and avoid banning anything that has any value whatsoever on the secondary market. It seems to be part of the driving force, which makes for really frustrating environments where they just go, looks fine to us, tee-hee, and then you sit there going, really, no, it's not. And you know it's not. You just don't want to move on it because of the money aspects. Now, the next card they banned, I can give them credit on acting faster on because it's actually from Throne of Eldraine, and that's Cauldron Familiar. Now, on the surface of it, you look at Cauldron Familiar and you're like, what's the big deal? It's a 1/1 for 1, and you sack a food to bring it back into play. Whoop-de-doo! Well, when you combine it with the oven, which is obviously what they intended when they designed it, right? You sack it to the oven, you get a food, you sack the food, you bring it back. The problem with Cauldron Familiar is that it's so slow. It's so tedious. Honestly, the cards that would make me concede games the fastest, legitimately, Teferi, I'm out. Goodbye. I'm not even playing against you. Like, usually it didn't even get that far before I bounced out because I hate playing against white-blue. It's absolutely unfun. And white-blue players tend to be the kind that want to drag the game out and make sure you're having as little fun as possible. So, since I'm a casual player who plays in the casual queue with the big 250-card green deck, I don't mess around with that. And Cauldron Familiar gets an instant concede. If you play a first-turn cat against me, have the win, buddy. We're playing casual. I'm not giving up half an hour of my life where I sit there where you go, sack the cat, does it resolve? Sack the food, does it resolve? All this sort of thing, because even if I go past the turn, I have something as simple as a Bark-Tooth Troll out, and the game's going to be like, look, I know you said pass the turn, but he did something. Do you still want to do? And there's no button on Arena that says, I don't care what the clown across from me does. I'm not doing anything. Just don't make me click this button anymore. So, like, Cat Oven is just psychological torture where you just sit there and it's like the most boring nonsense in the world. Them getting rid of that is a smart move. Honestly, they need to bear in mind that if you want this game to be successful on Arena, you can't design things that are insanely slow and tedious like this. It's just completely unacceptable. Let's move on to the list of what's being banned in Pioneer. We've got Inverter of Truth. Now, Inverter of Truth is a combo card. Big surprise here. Pioneer, everything we're going to talk about, all combo cards. Essentially, combo banned in Pioneer. Not really, but overall, combo was disproportionately affecting Pioneer to the point where people were just abandoning the format in droves. Wizards of the Coast really dropped the ball with the last ban announcement, where instead of banning anything, they just went, you can use Oath of Nissa now too. While people were crying out, combo is making this so unfun, Wizards said, yeah, whatever, man, combo your heart out. Here, have Oath of Nissa too. So now they've come back and reversed their position and went, okay, all right, we will ban combo. And they actually went almost a little bit overboard with it. So they banned Inverter of Truth. Inverter of Truth is used in the whole, I'm trying to get rid of my deck so I can win by having an empty deck combo. Inverter of Truth makes it way too easy to do that, and it's a very uninteractive combo where the combo pieces, it doesn't matter. Unless you can counter them, you can't do anything about them. Destroying them afterwards doesn't do anything. You put the inverter out, it's already done its thing. Get rid of it, doesn't matter. You put out your win con, it triggers, you've already won, it doesn't matter, even if they destroy in response. So you can't answer that, right? The next thing on the list is actually Kethis the Hidden Hand. Now, Kethis didn't have an opportunity to reign supreme in Pioneer with his crazy, ridiculous, very, like, just very involved combo, honestly. When it comes to combos, some are really direct. Use card A and card B. Kethis combos tend to be a little more involved, where there's more opportunities to make mistakes, but also it makes the combo take longer to sit through and can feel more tedious. But I think Wizards of the Coast is just playing it safe and going, you know what? We don't want to deal with Kethis becoming a problem. Let's just nerf him now, because everything we're nerfing right now is combos, and nobody is playing Pioneer. So Kethis got nerfed preemptively. Walking Ballista has been banned, and Walking Ballista literally just combines with Heliod to go instant win. The Walking Ballista goes, remove a counter for me, do 1 damage to any target. And then Heliod goes, hey, did a creature you have, like, did you gain life? Put a +1/+1 counter on creature. So you just give Ballista lifelink, which is something you can straight up do just with Heliod. Remove a counter off the Ballista, do a damage to any target, gain a life, and then Heliod goes, hey, I noticed you gained a life. Would you like to put a +1/+1 counter on something? Yes, I do. Put it on the Ballista. Oh, look, remove, do a damage, gain a life, rinse and repeat, infinite. You know what I mean? That's 2 cards. That's a 2-card combo you can do in 1 color. Like, you don't even, you can just go mono white. So, boom, Ballista got the ban. And then the last one is Underworld Breach for the Breach combo deck. And obviously, without Breach, the Breach combo doesn't, like, the deck can't do what it does. So it's a really obvious choice to remove. When it comes to these cards that mess around in the graveyard like this, you know, you're playing with fire to a degree. Although, I'll be real, I don't have as much of a problem with them playing around with cards like Underworld Breach than I do with cards like, say, for example, Fires of Invention. You know what I mean? Like, you have to at least pay casting costs and exile cards with Breach. Now, clearly that wasn't enough to stop it from working, but on the other hand, it's not like an area I think they need to stay away from. Whereas I think free spells where you just ignore casting costs and things like that, that sort of stuff needs to be stayed away from. I don't think that that can be done in an effective manner. Now, that's my personal opinion. Let's move on to Historic, where we don't have bannings, but we do have suspensions. We have Wilderness Reclamation suspended there. Same kind of problem, obviously, as we've talked about in Standard. And Teferi Time Raveler also catching a suspension in Historic. So this can either be upgraded to a ban later on or downgraded to released back out into the wild. I mean, these sort of restrictions in Historic do make me wonder if Historic's about to become a 1-deck format. Historic already just felt like a 2-deck format where you were playing like a multicolored blue-green, blue-white, blue-green-white deck, right? Where like you had those versus the Muxus Goblin decks, where there's like a billion of each of these 2 builds. But it feels like this is going to nerf the one side of it to the point where Muxus Goblins are just going to reign supreme. I don't know, though. I'm not a meta master. That's a view from the outside from a guy who sometimes dabbles in this stuff and also pays attention to what other people are saying about it, all right? And then the final format that's affected is Brawl, and that's Teferi Time Raveler getting banned. So Teferi is getting the boot in multiple areas and also being suspended. And this should have happened previously. There's no real excuse for Teferi getting to stick around as long as they did, other than the fact that they helped to push the price of War of the Spark boxes upwards. And unfortunately, Wizards of the Coast does make banning decisions based on how much they're going to be able to sell stuff no matter what they say to us, right? They're not going to ever admit that, but that is what's going on. So in terms of their actual logic for it, it says, in the last ban and restricted list update, we chose not to make any changes to Standard. At that time, the environment had just seen the results of Player Tours 3 and 4, the companion rules change was recent, and Core Set 2021 had just entered the format. While we saw new decks emerging, ultimately the top decks were able to adapt and retain their metagame share. After watching the environment progress for several weeks and reviewing the deck list entries for the Player Tour Finals, we've decided to make some changes to shake up the metagame. And I mean, it shows you how warped things are, that they're not willing to just wait a month and let this stuff rotate out naturally. Things are that dire, right? The set of changes is a deviation from our usual ban list philosophies for Standard, and as such, we consider it an experiment. Outside of the very top levels of competitive play, including throughout most of the MTG Arena traditional Standard ladder, we're seeing we're seeing a good distribution of deck diversity and win rates. However, the skill level of our most competitive tournaments and the mythic ranking on the arena ladder, we do see a small number of decks with high win rates and play rates that have remained in that metagame position for quite some time. So essentially at the very top, which would be, you know, MPL, high-level events that people watch, all the very best players in the game are playing the most broken, dumb nonsense to the point where it's so stale that they're begging Wizards for bans, going like, there are literal MPL members who are paid to play this game saying, I don't want to play this. I don't want to deal with this anymore. This is unfun. That is really bad from a marketing standpoint. And people also do like to copy the top tier decks. If you have a stagnant, like a super stagnant situation at the top of the meta, that is disastrous for the game. It totally trickles down the hole. Everything else seems to be healthy, not for long with that kind of a scenario, you know? So you have it continuing. Under our usual approach, we would have allowed standard rotation to provide a natural and predictable shift in the metagame with the release of Zendikar Rising. But in an era of social distancing, the proportion of standard play occurring on digital platforms has increased substantially, as the rate at which players can rack up games of standard in digital is higher than tabletop. That's true. You can play Magic whenever you want, right? You don't have to go to a game store. We believe it's correct to enact metagame change at a faster rate as well. Therefore, we're making bans targeted at weakening decks that have been strong and popular at the highest level of competitive play, and at some cards and combos that have overstayed their welcome in the eyes of much of the standard community. Ramp decks using Growth Spiral together made up 68% of the day one metagame at the Players Tour Finals. Now that is an accomplishment in and of itself. That is a well-designed common, and in all in terms of like power level to a degree. Obviously, well-designed may be me overspeaking the fact that they need to ban it. What I'm trying to say is that it's nice to have commons that actually matter. All commons just being for draft and being junky, that sucks. And it creates situations even for collector's boosters. We're opening those cards. Growth Spiral isn't well-designed in that it's too powerful. So that was a slight mistake. And now that I've clarified it, let's move on. Because 68% of the day one metagame doesn't represent well-designed. I just mean, I want more commons that matter, but not that matter this much. So Growth Spiral represented approximately 25 to 30% of the metagame at the Mythic ranking on the arena ladder. Within that category, Wilderness Reclamation decks have been considered the strongest archetype by much of the competitive community, making up 54% of the metagame at the Players Tour Finals, and about 15% of the Mythic metagame on arena. In order to remove Reclamation decks from this most played spot, and to reduce the metagame share of ramp decks in general, Wilderness Reclamation and Growth Spiral are banned. Another archetype that's maintained a high win rate over a long period of time is Black-Red or Jund Sacrifice, featuring Cauldron Familiar and Witch's Oven. In addition to having high overall win rates, these decks put considerable pressure on aggressive and mid-range creature decks. Further, the number of triggers generated by these decks can be cumbersome for both players in digital play. To weaken these sacrifice strategies, open up more metagame diversity, and create a more fun gameplay environment, Cauldron Familiar is banned. I think that Wizards needs to pay more attention to more fun gameplay environment. I think that needs to be weighted more highly than simply going, well, once we've gotten to this particular threshold of percentage, that's the only time we ban. You know what I mean? Because fun matters. We're playing a game. It should be fun. It says, finally, we'll also be removing Teferi Time Raveler from the environment. We've often heard the feedback that the repetitive play patterns and reduced capability for interaction that Teferi Time Raveler can create feel oppressive and limiting. It's crazy because they've been hearing this for almost 2 years. While we'd consider banning Teferi Time Raveler in past updates, one reason we didn't was evidence that it was helping hold Wilderness Reclamation decks in check. How insane is that? Well, people felt like this card was really unfair, and this card was really unfair and unfun, but we felt like they balanced out. What are you doing? Take them both out! Oh my god! Anyways, they're gone now, okay? So, okay, it is a little bit triggering. While with Wilderness Reclamation leaving the environment, we feel it's also time for the standard metagame to move on without Teferi Time Raveler. We note that Growth Spiral, Wilderness Reclamation, and Teferi Time Raveler were already slated to rotate this fall with the release of Zendikar Rising, With that in mind, we view this set of changes as an early rotation for those cards to help freshen up the remaining summer metagame. Oh yeah, we don't want to take responsibility and go, yeah, you know what, we screwed up and we banned them, so we have to do this banning. Just think of it as early rotation and not that we made a mistake. Get out. Get out of here. Well, in the case of Cauldron Familiar, we're taking the opportunity not only to improve the metagame short term, but also remove a balance risk and undesirable play pattern leading into next year. This Cauldron Familiar ban, this is the type of action Wizards needs to be taking more frequently. But what they really need to do is get their act together and balance cards more. If you look at all of the bannings we've had in the last 1 to 2 years compared to this huge time frame we had, we had virtually no bannings, and you think about the fact that Wizards of the Coast thought it would be fine for all of this stuff to be in standard at the same time. They thought that Teferi, Wilderness Reclamation, Growth Spiral, Oko, all these things should be together at the same time. Fires of Invention, like, it's insane how they don't understand how to create a balanced environment. They used to, so there's no excuse for this. We emphasize these changes are to a large degree a product of the times and the current focus on digital play. We look forward to hearing community feedback on this approach and will continue to keep an eye on the metagame going forwards. The next section we have is Pioneer, and I must wet my whistle. Professionalism. With the last banned and restricted list update, we chose to unban Oath of Nyssa and Pioneer. This wasn't intended to be a major update to the format or an alternative to other changes, but rather what we viewed as a relatively safe unban in the context of a metagame that was looking unhealthy by many metrics. Much community discussion followed that update, prompting us to take a further look at the need for change in Pioneer. Although we continue to see many different decks that have success in Pioneer, and no decks with problematic win rates against the field, we do see that combo decks as a group make up a large portion of the competitive metagame. We've heard feedback that the frequency at which one finds themselves facing an opposing combo deck restricts deck building options and can make play experiences enjoyable. Yeah, you heard that feedback before the last ban announcement. While win rate data may not point to a change being needed, a different, more important set of data does. Player participation. Oh, interesting. You can't just look at the percentage of a win rate and go, oh, this deck's winning a bunch. That's a problem. Oh, you mean a bunch of people are leaving Magic? But look, this deck only has a 25% win rate. Yeah, but nobody's playing the format. But win rate percentage, of course. Of course, player participation. Like, a different, more important set of data. Yes, of course. They weren't looking at that before. This is what's crazy. They already knew that Pioneer wasn't being played when they unbanned Oath of Nyssa. Anyways, while the reduction in tabletop tournaments due to the need for social distancing shortly after Pioneer's launch early this year is certainly a factor, we've also seen a decline in Pioneer play rates on MTGO throughout the course of the year. It's clear that many players who have been or could be interested in Pioneer are ready for a change. It seems like Wizards of the Coast is not really good at guiding new formats. Ultimately, how much fun players are having with the environment is the most important driving force behind BNR updates. I don't believe that. I think they're saying it, but I don't believe that's how they do things. They just go, please don't leave and please don't make us ban cards that are worth a lot of money. Let's be real. And so we're choosing to ban 4 cards to shake things up and push the competitive metagame away from combo decks. These bans are primarily aimed at disrupting the Inverter of Truth decks, Underworld Breach decks, Heliod Sun-Crowned and Walking Ballista combo, and the Kethis Hidden Hand combo decks. While Kethis combo decks are relatively new in the metagame, we're seeing signs that these decks are already problematic and would become more so if other top decks were weakened. Kethis decks are currently among the top 5-0 trophy winners in Magic Online Pioneer Leagues, despite being a modest portion of the field. Therefore, we're choosing to ban Inverter of Truth, Underworld Breach, Walking Ballista, and Kethis in Pioneer. Our intent is to dramatically reduce instances where players risk losing to a combo when tapping out in the early to mid game. This should open up the field for more traditional mid-range and control decks and put less pressure on aggressive decks to also focus on hand disruption and counterspells. We did consider several other cards as alternative bans aimed at these decks. Thassa's Oracle was one we discussed as a lighter touch for weakening Inverter and Breach decks. However, Inverter decks are still capable of winning with Jace, Wielder of Mysteries alone, and it isn't clear that a Thassa's Oracle ban would be enough to push Inverter decks out of the competitive metagame. And next, even though Thassa's Oracle has often been a win condition of choice for Underworld Breach decks, once the deck's core combo engine is running, it can win in many ways. Some recent versions of the Underworld Breach deck even forego Thassa's Oracle entirely. The cards we've chosen are the set that gives us the most confidence in creating a significant shift in the metagame. We understand this represents a large change to the Pioneer environment, and frankly, that's the intent. While we're past the phase of frequent weekly updates to Pioneer, we're still in a period where changes are necessary to help shape the format in its initial launch year. We want to ensure that Pioneer can deliver an enjoyable play experience to players who are looking for an accessible, non-rotating format that's closer to standard and power level and offers a variety of archetypes and decks to choose from. We're dedicated to actively supporting Pioneer and will continue to incorporate both data and community feedback. The historic metagame is moving quickly right now. The addition of new cards through Jumpstart is having a large impact, as will Amonkhet Remastered when it arrives soon. There are many of these new decks we're watching closely, but our strong preference in times like this is to give the meta time to develop naturally. We want to see which of these decks turn out to show enduring strength versus merely making an initial splash. That said, there are two places where we feel we have enough information we should take action: the Wilderness Reclamation and Teferi. We touched on Wilderness Reclamation in our last Ban and Restricted List update, saying that while it's powerful, we're only seeing it in problematic decks alongside Nexus of Fate. Since then, we've seen a Temur Reclamation deck grow steadily in Historic that uses Expansion, Explosion, and Field of the Dead. We're seeing this deck put up significant numbers, representing over 10% of the best of 3 games, while maintaining concerning win rates. This is a card and deck configuration we've spent a good time discussing and analyzing and watching, so we feel that this is one where we have enough information to act. In order to encourage increased metagame health and variety, Wilderness Reclamation is suspended in Historic. For Teferi Time Ravelry, we get much the same feedback that we get in Standard. Basically, we find that the power of the reduced capability for interaction that Teferi brings scales with the power of the interaction he's preventing, and on the board he's consistently protecting. He's also seen frequently in Historic, appearing in over 20% of Historic best of 3 games, and a significant percentage in other modes as well. For these reasons, we're suspending Teferi in Historic. As with all suspensions, we'll be monitoring this impact. And Brawl, Teferi's one of the most played commanders in Brawl, and appearing over 10% of the games, he has one of the highest win rates. In addition, we see a similar impact in Brawl, described in other formats, so Teferi's also banned in Brawl. Now, the timing of these banning announcements takes effect today. They've actually already banned them on Arena, which is impressive. There's no actual waiting. If you log into Arena, already banned, and you're good to go. Overall, I think all of these choices are excellent. Some of them are a little late. The Cauldron Familiar one surprised me, but overall makes perfect sense to me. I am interested to know your thoughts, so let me know them in the comments, I should say, below. If you like what I'm doing here, like, comment, subscribe. It really helps the channel. I have a second channel where I have just released a brand new lore video yesterday. It's Joy Restory, and things are getting absolutely intense, so check that out if you like magic lore, or even if you're just curious. Might turns out you like magic lore more than you thought. If you love what I'm doing here, support me on Patreon. Thanks for coming by, everybody. I will see you all very soon, probably to talk about a big problem with VIP Masters that nobody else is talking about. So let's talk about that tomorrow.